faithfully conveying value, interpreting great books worldwide. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're discussing The Road to Power, Catherine the Great, Part 2. In Part 1, we explored how Catherine, a German princess, married into Russia and established herself amidst the turbulent court intrigues. In July 1762, the 33-year-old Catherine seized power through a coup, overthrowing Peter III to become the eighth ruler of the Russian Empire. And I'll begin here to outline Catherine's extraordinary life journey. This second half is divided into 4 sections. First, consolidating power through both incentives and coercion after taking the throne. Second, crafting her public image as an enlightened autocrat. Third, territorial expansion through the partitioning of Poland and conquest of Crimea. Fourth, her twilight years, navigating challenges and arranging succession. All right, let's begin with Part 1, consolidating power through both incentives and coercion after taking the throne. Before Catherine, Russia had seen several female rulers, but all were born into the royal family. For example, Empress Elizabeth was Peter the Great's eldest daughter, carrying the Romanov bloodline. Catherine's uniqueness lay in being a foreign-born consort with no royal blood. From a succession perspective, she was essentially a usurper, guaranteeing challenges to her legitimacy. Indeed, from the moment she assumed power, fears of conspiracy and rebellion haunted Catherine. Thus, she employed various methods to secure her rule, with 4 key measures standing out. Let's examine them one by one. First, rewarding allies, retaining experienced ministers, and pardoning opponents after ascending the throne. New monarchs must first reward their supporters, and Catherine followed this tradition. Among her key supporters, the Orloff brothers played a unique role by mobilizing the Imperial Guard to arrest Peter III. And their indispensable role in the coup naturally earned them Catherine's lavish rewards. Catherine ennobled her lover, Grigory Orloff, granting him 50,000 rubles up front, plus 150,000 rubles annually. This was a colossal fortune then, enabling massive land purchases and armies of servants. The other 4 brothers and Imperial Guard officers also received generous rewards. This secured their fierce loyalty and vows to protect the Empress at all costs. Count Panin, another coup architect, who rallied ministers to acclaim Catherine as Empress, received an annual pension of 5,000 rubles. Catherine also appointed him as foreign minister, responsible for handling Russia's diplomatic affairs. Count Panin, he held this position for 18 years until his death, demonstrating the immense trust placed in him. But Catherine was no practitioner of nepotism. On the contrary, immediately after ascending the throne, she sent all relatives who had accompanied her to Russia back to Germany. Senior officials from Peter III's era, from the prime minister to field marshals, all retained their positions. Through this, she showed that rather than favoring relatives, the Empress prioritized safeguarding the bureaucracy's vested interests without upheaval. Towards former opponents, Catherine displayed leniency. For instance, Vorontsova, Peter III's mistress who nearly became Russia's Empress, faced no harassment. Instead, Catherine arranged her marriage, securing a respectable future. These actions helped stabilize public sentiment, ensuring Catherine navigated the early instability of her reign smoothly. Now, her second measure to consolidate power, ending the war to alleviate financial strain. As previously covered, Peter III had abandoned Russia's traditional alliance with France and Austria against Prussia, instead allying with Prussia. Consequently, Peter III ordered the Russian army, holding absolute advantage, to retreat entirely, sparking fierce resentment among officers and soldiers. Remember, for years the Russian army had fought Prussia with intense ferocity. Suddenly, the enemy became an ally, a mental shift too abrupt to accept. Upon taking power, Catherine immediately nullified the Prussian treaty to appease the military. Indeed, news of this elated the Russian troops, though it didn't mean reigniting war. Catherine calculated wisely. While the military rejected a Prussian alliance, they also opposed continuing the war. After 7 years of fighting, exhaustion and war weariness prevailed. Worse, years of war drained the treasury, forcing massive borrowing that accumulated 17 million rubles in foreign debt. To repay debts, the government diverted military funds, leaving troops unpaid for 8 months. Frontline soldiers voiced bitter complaints. The urgent priorities were halting the war and pacifying the army. Catherine assured Prussia's King Frederick II that though their alliance ended, no further war would occur. Frederick II agreed. Subsequently, Catherine issued a succinct command to the Russian army: go home. With the war over, military morale stabilized, financial conditions gradually improved, and Catherine's prestige grew further.
Simultaneously, she introduced a third measure to subdue another major power bloc: the Orthodox Church.
Peter III had ordered the confiscation of all properties under the Orthodox Church's name, thereby pushing it into opposition. The reason the Church strongly supported Catherine during the coup was in the hope that she would reverse this policy. And that, after coming to power, Catherine did indeed terminate the decree to secure the Church's support. However, she had reservations. In fact, Catherine also believed the Church's power was too extensive and needed to be restrained. Therefore, she proposed that returning the properties was acceptable, but from then on, the Church had to regularly pay a poll tax to the government. Additionally, the appointment and dismissal of high-ranking clergy required the Tsar's approval. The Church was naturally dissatisfied with this, but between two evils, they chose the lesser. Paying taxes was better than confiscation, so they tacitly accepted. This established the principle of the Church's subordination to the Tsar, asserting that imperial authority superseded ecclesiastical authority. However, some clergy still dissented. Catherine cracked down harshly on them. For example, a bishop named Arsenius firmly opposed government interference in church affairs, arguing it would undermine the Church's independence and contravene Russian tradition. Arsenius called upon the Holy Synod, the Orthodox Church's highest authority, to take action and halt the expansion of imperial power. Catherine, infuriated, denounced Arsenius for making trouble without reason and inciting public unrest. At Catherine's request, the Holy Synod stripped Arsenius of his position and exiled him to Siberia for hard labor. Catherine also deliberately slashed church funding to weaken its economic power. As a result, the number of monasteries in Russia decreased from 572 at its peak to 160, and the Orthodox Church's social influence significantly declined. By 1764, having consolidated her power 2 years after ascending the throne, Catherine issued a decree declaring the Church a government institution that must show absolute loyalty to the Tsar's authority. Thus, it was thoroughly tamed. Clearly, Catherine was not only adept at winning hearts, but also unyielding when necessary, truly a master of both the carrot and the stick. Her fourth measure, establishing the position of Procurator General, similarly demonstrated her tough stance. During Peter the Great's reign, he established a Senate composed of nobles, responsible for enforcing laws and adjudicating major cases. The Tsar would also come to the Senate to discuss state affairs and seek the senators' opinions. Over time, the Senate became a venue where nobles voiced demands and pursued interests. It gradually developed a tendency to rival the Tsar's authority.
Early in Catherine's reign, some senators even proposed transferring legislative power to the Senate.
If implemented, this would have imposed constraints on imperial power. Catherine absolutely forbade such a scenario and flatly refused. Catherine also created the position of Procurator General to strengthen control over the Senate. On the surface, the Procurator General, as the Empress's representative, resided in the Senate to liaise with senators, facilitating communication. But in reality, he closely monitored senators' activities and reported promptly to the Empress, essentially acting as a spy. In a letter to the first Procurator General Wiazemski, Catherine stated bluntly, "The Senate has arbitrarily issued decrees, appointed officials, and granted titles, acting without restraint." "Keep a close watch," she instructed. "Don't let senators act recklessly. And above all, never threaten imperial authority." Wiazemski served diligently for 28 years, helping Catherine bring the Senate firmly to heel. In summary, since ascending the throne, Catherine used both incentives and coercion to control the bureaucracy, military, church, and Senate, firmly grasping all power. In terms of centralized power, rulers of major nations like Britain, France, Spain, and Austria paled in comparison. Catherine could be called Europe's most powerful absolute monarch. But Catherine didn't wish to be seen as despotic. Instead, she preferred showcasing her benevolent side. To this end, she meticulously crafted her image, striving to portray herself as an enlightened, wise empress. This brings us to part 2, crafting her persona as a model of enlightened autocracy. In the mid-18th century, the French Enlightenment flourished. Thinkers like Montesquieu and Voltaire championed science and reason, advocated liberty and equality, and fiercely criticized absolute monarchy as barbaric. Their works spread widely. Enlightenment ideas flourished among the upper classes. From kings and nobles to merchants and townspeople, many enthusiastically embraced the Enlightenment. Among these, Prussia's King Frederick II stood out most prominently. Prussia was highly militarized, spending 80% of revenue on arms. Frederick II was a quintessential absolute monarch, notoriously autocratic, yet he excelled at self-promotion. After all, wasn't Enlightenment thought sweeping Europe? He packaged himself as an admirer of Enlightenment thinkers, corresponded with them, and funded their book publishing and travels. He also personally wrote books criticizing unrestricted monarchical power, earning Voltaire's praise. Domestically, he encouraged cultural activities and promoted the so-called German Enlightenment, making Frederick II a model of enlightened absolutism. What is enlightened absolutism? It is a form of autocratic system. Enlightenment thinkers believed that absolute monarchy was a political system suitable for European countries' conditions, provided that the monarch remained enlightened, wise, and tolerant. And that's pro-entomon. Frederick II achieved this. When Catherine ascended the throne, Frederick II had already reigned for over 20 years. She learned many skills from this predecessor, the most important being crafting her persona according to the standards of enlightened absolutism. In this regard, Catherine had an advantage. Her childhood tutor was French, influencing her to speak fluent French. She had read numerous French classics and was very familiar with Enlightenment thinkers. Soon after ascending the throne, Catherine wrote to Voltaire, claiming, "My conduct and reasoning abilities are the result of studying your works." At that time, Voltaire had angered the French king by criticizing France's autocratic system and was exiled from Paris, moving to Geneva, Switzerland, to live in seclusion. Suddenly, a letter expressing admiration arrived from the young Empress in faraway Russia, making the nearly 70-year-old philosopher somewhat flattered. They began corresponding, discussing topics like philosophy, history, and politics, and Voltaire admired Catherine's cultural literacy and insight. He circulated the letters among friends, earning Catherine a good reputation in European intellectual circles. Catherine also formed a deep friendship with Diderot, another leading figure of the Enlightenment, and a French thinker. Diderot was dedicated to compiling the Encyclopedia, a monumental work aiming to encompass all known human knowledge at the time. Such a massive project inevitably required huge funds, which Diderot's finances could hardly bear. Catherine offered to fund it, but to preserve the dignity of a scholar, she didn't give money directly. Instead, she purchased Diderot's entire book collection and thoughtfully stated that the books would remain in his custody because separating a scholar from his library was too cruel.
Catherine also specially appointed Diderot as the librarian, paying him an annual salary of £1,000.
The next year, Catherine forgot to pay the salary and to apologize, she sent £50,000 in one go. With her help, the encyclopedia was successfully published, and Diderot was so grateful he wept and wrote letters of praise. Catherine was the greatest monarch of the time. Promoted by Voltaire, Diderot, and others, her fame spread far and wide, making her another model of enlightened absolutism after Frederick II. It must be admitted that Catherine's interactions with Enlightenment thinkers had the motive of using them to embellish her image and whitewash reality. And in reality, Russia's institutions were barbaric and its culture backward, far from meeting the standards of enlightened absolutism. But the book's author points out that, having been influenced by the Enlightenment since childhood, Catherine's identification with Enlightenment ideas wasn't entirely famed. There was a sincere side to it. She also attempted to govern using Enlightenment ideas, and three things demonstrate her efforts. First, promoting education and encouraging culture. In 18th century Russia, illiteracy was widespread. Even among the nobles, many were illiterate. To change this situation, Catherine built schools and libraries, requiring nobles to receive education, which significantly raised their knowledge level and gradually formed an intellectual class dominated by the nobility. They were familiar with mainstream European culture, skilled in creation, and produced outstanding writers like the father of poetry, Zhukovsky, and drama founder Sumarokov, laying the foundation for the glory of Russian literature. Second, reforming the law and creating a legal code. Russia's laws were inherited from the Middle Ages, not only messy in content, but also severely outdated in concept. In 1767, Catherine promulgated a legal code in the form of an instruction to rebuild Russia's legal system. And the instruction was divided into 20 chapters, with 526 articles, over half of the entries. Adapted from the famous work The Spirit of the Laws by the French thinker Montesquieu, it had a distinct Enlightenment tendency. In the preface, Catherine criticized Russian laws as too barbaric, filled with arbitrary interpretations, torture, and abuse of criminal law. Reform was necessary, and the instruction even imposed some constraints on the monarch, emphasizing the supremacy of imperial power, while stating that no matter how great the monarch's power, they have no right to trample on traditional customs and social conventions. Oh, well, this meant that even as Tsar, one couldn't do whatever one wanted. The extent to which the instruction was implemented is hard to gauge, but it at least showed that Catherine had good intentions to push for reforms. Of course, reforms always encounter resistance. The more significant the reform, the greater the resistance. And this is especially evident in the third matter, reforming the serfdom system. In the mid-18th century, Russia's total population was about 20 million, of which 10 million serfs belonged to the imperial family, nobles, and the church. They were bound to the land for life, toiling hard, unable to move freely, without any rights, subject to their master's orders, humiliation, and trade. Looking across Europe, the plight of Russian peasants was the most miserable, and serfdom became a symbol of Russia's barbarism and backwardness. Catherine was very opposed to serfdom and wanted to abolish it. However, this met with strong opposition from the nobility, who were the biggest beneficiaries of serfdom. They even measured their wealth by the number of serfs they owned. For example, the Sheremetev family, Russia's most prominent nobles, owned 210,000 serfs, a number exceeding the total population of St. Petersburg. These serfs farmed the land, mined, dug coal, and sold goods, thereby sustaining the Sheremetev family's lavish lifestyle. Now, Catherine wanted to liberate the serfs. How could the Sheremetev family agree? They firmly resisted. Catherine understood clearly that the nobility was the cornerstone of autocracy. Actions harming their interests couldn't be done, so she had to compromise and abandon reforming serfdom. Naturally, this came with a cost. And, due to unbearable oppression, serfs across the country frequently rebelled, shaking the foundation of the Tsar's rule, with the Pugachev rebellion being the largest in scale. In 1773, serfs in the Ukraine region rose up under the leadership of Yemelyan Pugachev, a former soldier. Wherever the rebel army went, they abolished serfdom, canceled harsh taxes, and took revenge on nobles. Many nobles were whipped to death, burned alive, or hanged, attracting more serfs to join.
The rebellion swept across western and central Russia, with responses even from distant Siberia.
Catherine mobilized a large army and spent a year and a half suppressing the rebellion. The Pugachev rebellion exposed the brutal and ruthless nature of Tsarist rule, casting a heavy shadow over Catherine's enlightened autocracy persona. After this, Catherine no longer sought reforms, but focused on foreign expansion, which became the main theme of her mid to late reign. Part 3, Expanding Territory, Partitioning Poland, and Conquering Crimea, will narrate this process. To put it bluntly, foreign expansion is practically an instinct for Russians. They started from the Grand Duchy of Moscow and, through 2 centuries of conquest, expanded into the vast Tsarist Russian Empire, spanning Eurasia. By the mid-18th century, Russian territory extended eastward to cover Siberia and across the Bering Strait, occupying what is now Alaska in the U.S. To the west, they seized the Baltic Sea outlet, annexed the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, and pushed the border into the heart of Europe. In short, Russia was already a superpower, but that wasn't enough. For the Tsar, expanding the territory was seen as a divinely ordained duty. Every Tsar had to achieve something in this regard, as if failing to do so would be unacceptable to God, and Catherine was no exception. The question was, where to expand? 2 directions, one to the west, to annex Polish territory, the other to the south, to contend with the Ottoman Turks for the Crimean Peninsula. First, let's discuss the annexation of Polish territory. Historically, Poland was once powerful. In the mid-16th century, when it formed a union with Lithuania, its territory covered present-day Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Western Russia. In the early 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian army captured Moscow and installed a puppet Tsar, becoming the first European army to occupy Moscow. Only Napoleon achieved this later, which shows the strength of the Poles. But soon after, Poland began to decline. By Catherine's reign, it had become so weak that it became a vassal of Tsarist Russia, with its king even replaced by Catherine's former lover, Stanislaw Poniatowski, the former Polish ambassador to Russia. Russia effectively controlled Poland's internal affairs. Some Polish nobles tried to reverse the situation by plotting an armed uprising. Catherine decisively suppressed it, exiling 5,000 Polish nobles to Siberia in one go. In 1772, Catherine joined forces with Poland's neighbors, Austria and Prussia, to seize 1/3 of Polish territory. In 1993 and 1995, the 3 nations partitioned Poland again. After 3 partitions, Poland lost all its territory and ceased to exist. In total, Russia took 460,000 square kilometers of land from Poland.
This included vast regions such as Belarus, Lithuania, and western Ukraine, with a total population exceeding 2.5 million. Russia gained more than Austria and Prussia, becoming the biggest winner.
Now, let's look at Catherine's efforts in the south. The main adversary in this direction was the Ottoman Turks. The so-called Ottoman Turks refer to the Ottoman Empire founded by the Turks, which rose in the early 14th century and at its peak spanned Europe, Asia, and Africa. However, like empires throughout history, the Ottoman Empire couldn't escape decline after its peak, with national power waning daily.
As neighbors, Russia wanted to take advantage, covering most the Ottoman vassal state on the northern Black Sea coast.
The Crimean Khanate, which encompassed the Crimean Peninsula and parts of what's now southern Ukraine. Recently, during special military operations in Ukraine, The highly watched cities of Odessa and Kherson fell under its jurisdiction. And if it could annex the Crimean Khanate, Russia would gain control of the Black Sea and seek to sail into the Mediterranean, extending its influence. This was the dream of successive czars, but even a starved camel is bigger than a horse. From Peter the Great to Empress Elizabeth, repeated military conflicts with the Ottomans yielded little gain, while Russia's aggressive posture made Turks uneasy. Catherine's ambition to annex Poland made them feel that when lips are gone, teeth will be cold. After all, the Ottoman-controlled Balkans bordered Poland. Once Poland fell, Russia would focus on them. Waiting passively was worse than striking first. In October 1768, the Ottoman Empire demanded Russian withdrawal from Poland, but was refused. The Ottomans immediately declared war on Russia. Their army planned to advance from the Balkans into Poland to expel Russian forces. Meanwhile, the Crimean Khanate would attack Ukraine as a diversion. Unfortunately, the Turks miscalculated. Russian commander Rumyantsev, a renowned general, repelled the Crimean Khanate, then gathered his main forces and crushed the Ottoman army in Poland, driving them back to the Balkans, even threatening Istanbul. The panicked Turks requested peace talks. Catherine set terms: surrender the Crimean Khanate in exchange for Russian withdrawal. The Turks were forced to agree. Thus, the Russo-Turkish War ended in complete Russian victory. Catherine achieved her wish, incorporating Crimea into the empire. The next problem was governing Crimea's multi-ethnic region, inhabited by Mongols, Greeks, Armenians, and others. The Russians indiscriminately labeled them all as Tatars, considering them crude, barbaric, and difficult to manage. Catherine needed someone exceptionally capable and trustworthy to restore order. She chose Grigory Potemkin, who rose from the Imperial Guard, having distinguished himself suppressing the Pugachev rebellion and in the Russo-Turkish Wars. He was promoted to general. Subsequently, Potemkin implemented a series of military reforms, demonstrating exceptional political acumen and organizational skills. More importantly, Potemkin shared a special relationship with Catherine. Records show Catherine had 12 lovers in her lifetime. Potemkin was her most cherished companion in her later years. Entrusting Crimea to him, she felt completely at ease. From 1774, Potemkin governed Crimea for 17 remarkable years. Key cities like Odessa, Kherson, and Sevastopol were built under his direction. He also captured Okakov, the Ottoman Empire's last stronghold on the northern Black Sea coast, further securing Russia's southern frontier. In October 1791, Potemkin passed away. Upon hearing the news, Catherine wailed, "I'm utterly alone now. Nothing will ever be the same. Nothing." This lament honored Potemkin while inadvertently revealing the new challenges facing Catherine. Part 4, Twilight Years. From navigating upheavals to arranging succession, we enter the Empress's final years. In July 1789, the French Revolution erupted. The National Assembly, composed of bourgeoisie, urban commoners, and peasants, abolished feudalism and noble privileges. In August, the Assembly issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man, establishing principles like equality before law and inviolability of private property. Initially, Catherine remained optimistic since revolutionary ideals like liberty, equality, and fraternity originated from the Enlightenment, ideals she always endorsed. But as events unfolded, her attitude shifted due to the revolution's radicalization. The National Assembly first stripped King Louis XVI of his powers. Later, it abolished the monarchy altogether, establishing a republic. In September 1792, the French Republic was proclaimed.
Thousands of miles away, Catherine felt bewildered, yet profoundly shaken.
She exclaimed,
This is utter chaos!
"The king will hang from the gallows," a prophecy that tragically came true. Now, in 1793, Louis XVI was sent to the guillotine, marking the French Revolution's descent into extremism. Shocked, Catherine realized that allowing the French Revolution's influence to spread would inevitably devastate monarchies worldwide. She took two countermeasures. First, strengthening domestic censorship of press and publications, blocking all news about the French Revolution. In 1796, Catherine established Russia's first formal censorship system, ordering the closure of all private publishing houses. She nationalized all book publishing, printing, and distribution, targeting every private entity. To eradicate heretical ideas at their root, French works were strictly controlled. Catherine even labeled Voltaire's complete works as French poison and ordered their recall, a stark contrast to her former admiration of Enlightenment thinkers. As they say, where you stand depends on where you sit. That's precisely what happened. As for disobedient intellectuals, Catherine ruthlessly targeted writer Alexander Radishchev, who authored A Journey from St. Petersburg to Moscow. The book's protagonist travels through towns and villages, exposing serfdom's horrors and calling for its abolition, something Catherine would have supported in the past. But times had changed. After the revolution, she viewed any criticism of Russia as arming foreign forces, smearing the empire, and threatening Tsarist rule. She arrested Radishchev and sentenced him to 10 years exile in Siberia, making an example of him to intimidate others into compliance. Now, her foreign policy, specifically forming an anti-French coalition with monarchies like Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Spain, Catherine drafted a 10-page diplomatic note centered on containing the revolution's influence and restoring France's monarchy. The first goal succeeded. During her lifetime, the coalition's vigilance prevented revolution from engulfing Europe. The second failed. When coalition forces invaded France, they awakened French nationalism. People sang La Marseillaise and repelled the invaders. Catherine's dream of restoring the French monarchy couldn't materialize soon, especially since she lacked the energy to pursue it. By the 1790s, Catherine was in her 60s, considered advanced age for that era. Her figure grew increasingly stout, her mouth filled with dentures, her vision deteriorated significantly, and she suffered from migraines. Plagued by rheumatism and indigestion, her experience and judgment were no longer what they once were. It was time to arrange her affairs, and this would be Catherine's final legacy to the Russian Empire. Two matters in this legacy deserve special mention. First, cultivating an heir. Catherine had only one son, Paul. Of course, Paul's parentage was mysterious. Rumors claimed his biological father was one of Catherine's lovers, and she herself hinted at this. But legally, as a Romanov descendant, his status as heir was undisputed and recognized by Russian subjects. The problem lay in their mother-son relationship. Paul was taken by Empress Elizabeth at birth and rarely saw his mother. After Elizabeth's death, Catherine regained custody, but found it too late to rebuild their bond. Their emotional distance persisted lifelong. Moreover, Paul's personality starkly contrasted with Catherine's. He was reclusive and eccentric, increasingly resembling Peter III, making Catherine doubt if he was truly her biological son. Fortunately, she adored Paul's eldest son, Alexander, born late 1777. Catherine placed immense hopes in this grandson and raised him personally. Every afternoon, she brought Alexander to her office. While she worked, he played nearby. She'd often pause to lie on the floor playing games or telling him stories. This was her transferring the maternal love she couldn't give Paul onto her grandson. Catherine arranged elite court education for Alexander, fluency in English, French, German, studies in politics, history, mathematics, plus painting, horsemanship, and cooking. She often kept Alexander by her side, personally teaching him to review state documents and discuss governance. History proved Catherine's upbringing of her grandson remarkably successful. After Paul reigned 5 years, he died, and Alexander ascended the throne.
Under his leadership, Russia repelled Napoleon's invasion, marched into Paris, and rose as a top European power.
Of course, even Alexander's brilliance required a capable team, a gift from Catherine, her final service to her successor. The second matter, selecting talented youth. Due to Catherine's frequent foreign wars, the Russian army gained extensive combat experience, producing many renowned generals. Like previously mentioned Rumyantsev and Potemkin, in her later years, Catherine prioritized promoting young generals for her descendants' use. Suvorov, Kutuzov, and Bagration all rose during her late reign, later becoming Alexander's key ministers who dominated European battlefields. Catherine also cultivated talents in administration, judiciary, and diplomacy. In summary, she bequeathed her successor a vast, powerful, talent-rich Russian empire. On the morning of November 5th, 1896, Catherine suffered a sudden stroke, fell into a coma, and stopped breathing the following evening at age 67. Her life divided into two periods by her ascension, the first marked by patience, culminating in a decisive coup, the second showcasing brilliance, implementing enlightened autocracy domestically, consolidating Tsarism, expanding territory abroad, and laying Russia's rise. Given her achievements, Russian subjects posthumously honored her as the Great. In Russian history, only 3 rulers earned the Great: Ivan IV, Peter I, and Catherine II. Catherine was the only woman among 4 female rulers to receive this honor, showing Russians' profound reverence. So, what are your thoughts on Catherine as a person? How do you evaluate her contributions to Russia? Welcome to share your comments below. Well, the road to power, that concludes our interpretation of Catherine the Great. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.